Can we prevent hair loss in patients undergoing chemotherapy? That's an important question, and I've got an answer for you today. Hi, everybody. I'm Dr. Jay Harness, co-founder and medical director at Breast Cancer Answers. And it's really my privilege today to have Kate Dilligan as my guest. Not surprisingly, with the slide you see up here, Kate is the founder and CEO of Cooler Heads. Hey, Kate, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Dr. Harness. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you've got such a fascinating story, particularly somebody who's got her MBA from Stanford. So let's do a little backstory here. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll get into how we got to Cooler Heads, okay?
Absolutely. So as you said, I have an MBA from Stanford and I was working in tech for more than a decade. And in 2016, I was diagnosed with estrogen positive breast cancer. And like so many other patients, was devastated when I was told I was in for chemotherapy, surgery, radiation, follow-up oral chemotherapy, years of tamoxifen. Just the thought of all the side effects I was going to be undergoing was overwhelming. And I had no idea when I was first diagnosed that there actually was a way for me to keep my hair during chemotherapy. A friend of mine actually did the research online. And so I found out about scalp cooling and how medically induced hypothermia can help the hair follicles prevent them from absorbing chemotherapy so patients can keep their hair. And I was able to do scalp cooling throughout my chemotherapy treatment, which was 4 cycles of AC and 4 of Taxol, and it worked, but it cost me over $8,000.
Whoa.
So after going through this experience, which
Oh.
was unbelievably high friction and expensive and just out of reach for most people, I thought there's got to be a better way to provide this therapy to patients. So anybody facing, taxane or AC-based chemo can have a choice as to whether or not they want to keep their hair. And I'm pleased to say that our solution is now cleared by the FDA and is being launched this month.
Well, fantastic. In my 35 plus years in dealing with breast cancer patients, there were always great fears. One of the greatest fears, of course, was chemotherapy. Not only the fact that you were receiving the chemotherapy and being poisoned, if you will, but the consequences of it, particularly hair loss, not only the hair, eyebrows, all sorts of hair loss. So that was always one of the scary things for patients, and you experienced that firsthand. Goodness gracious, a little bit about the $8,000 that you spent way back when. What was the technology or what was available back then?
So the only way that I had access to this treatment is using something called cold caps, which are literally gel caps that are cooled in a full-size ice chest with about 50 pounds of dry ice. And because they're ice, they're caps made out of ice packs, like what you would use to keep, beer and soda cool in a cooler during the summer months, because they are warmed up by the body's temperature, if you put like a bag of peas on your ankle, if you sprain it, it gets warm, right? The body's temperature warms them up. So they have to be switched on and off the patient's head every 20 to 30 minutes. And if you can imagine like what a gel pack like you have in your freezer is, it's rigid. And so, my head, your head, anybody who's watching it, their head is an oddly shaped spherical object. So you also have to have somebody who not only can switch them on and off your head, but can help craft them so they fit evenly. So you don't wind up with big, patchy, bald spots all over your head, which is just as disfiguring.
Sure.
Because here's the thing, Dr. Harness, in the interviews with now thousands of other cancer patients, hair loss from chemo, it's not about beauty. It fundamentally is about privacy, agency, and identity. It's controlling the narrative about who knows whether you're sick, whether you're a man or a woman.
Yep.
It's giving you some control back as you go through a really arduous treatment, because if you're getting the kind of chemo that makes your hair fall out, your life is really about your diagnosis and your treatment. And it's about your identity. It's about seeing somebody that you recognize when you brush your teeth in the morning.
Sure.
And that really, fundamentally gets to a patient's overall well-being. And one of the craziest stats that I found as I got into this, which is well established in oncology medical literature, is at least 8% of chemotherapy, of patients who are told that they should undergo chemotherapy, refuse it because they're afraid about losing their hair.
Yep.
And that's, those 8% of patients, if chemotherapy is recommended, it means because they have a very aggressive disease, and that is the best chance of them, managing their disease or truly being well.
Yeah.
And so we really are we fundamentally believe at Cooler Heads, by addressing the side effects of treatment, will increase adherence to treatment and decrease treatment hesitancy, which we
Yeah,
know is
well,
a huge problem in oncology.
Kate, that's really a good point. Well, listen, we're sharing your screen. You've got some slides up. Why don't you take you and I and our watching audience through your slides, okay?
Wonderful. So, as I said, cold cap therapy is well understood to be safe and effective. And as I said, it's medically induced hypothermia. Patients bring their scalp temperature down to about 65 degrees before, during, and for 2 hours following each chemotherapy infusion, because fundamentally that allows for vascular constriction. So the hair follicles are not absorbing chemotherapy, which allows the patients to keep their hair. Challenges to this therapy, you can see that image on the upper right. That's how I did cold cap therapy, with those gel packs that are Velcroed on and off the patient. Or there are medical devices that have been cleared by the FDA, but each of those methods is very difficult to use. The top one requires somebody to be with you the full time, to be fitting them, to be manhandling, a 60-pound cooler with, all this dry ice in it. And the medical devices, the legacy systems that have been cleared by the FDA, because the patients have to be set up at the infusion center by a nurse before their pre-med start, and then they have to stay in that chair for a minimum of 2 hours following chemotherapy. It's a huge throughput problem for the infusion centers because they're in the business of treating patients, and they've only built enough chairs to treat their patient loads. So if they all of a sudden have a patient who's in that chair double the amount of time it's their therapy, that fundamentally is a deal breaker for them. And so that's why we see less than 20% of patients in the United States actually have access to this treatment. And as I said, 85% of patients who undergo this therapy, even though you're bringing your scalp temperature down to 65 degrees, say that it's comfortable. Most patients maintain at least 60% of their hair. So your hair will thin, but fundamentally, like I like to talk about, like you can go out to dinner, you can go to the grocery store, you can pick up the kids from school, and you will know that your hair is thinner, but the rest of the world honestly won't notice. And it is most successful with predominantly taxane-based chemotherapy regimens. We are working on doing additional research to improve outcomes with others, but is very well understood to be most effective with taxane-based chemo. And, this quote that we have up there, coping with hair loss was more difficult than the loss of a breast. For those viewers who will remember Alex Trebek, the host of Jeopardy, who died of pancreatic cancer, he was wearing a wig for the last 18 months of his life. And he was very vocal about the fact that it was really traumatic for him to lose his hair. And even though people say, well, it's more socially acceptable for men, the interest that we're getting in the device, I would say, is evenly distributed between men and women.
Yeah, interesting. Now, hold on. Go back to that slide for just a second, if you can, Kate. So,
of course,
you're estimating that about, we're going, there we go.
Yep.
So
Sorry about that.
Just so we've got the number correct, you said about 65% of the hair is preserved with the cooling. Is that the number?
Okay. And so basically it's considered a success with the CTCA score. If you keep at least half your hair, that's considered a success. And especially, this concept that I mentioned earlier of preserving your hair evenly. So you don't have a disfiguring bald spot up here or up here, because all of a sudden that's that public signal to the world that you're ill.
Yeah, and I think it's really important, the point you're making about men who need chemotherapy. Alex Trebek was a great example of that. Not wanting to lose their hair either. So anyway, please go ahead. I just wanted to zero in on that number of 65%. Great.
Yeah, great to highlight it. Thank you. So what we've built is a product we've named AMA. And so AMA is the first portable, affordable, and scalable solution for scalp cooling. We've built a device that is fully patient administered. So we're offloading nurses, because nurses are one of the most valuable resources in our healthcare system and are also under the most stress now as we're coming out of COVID. The healthcare workers have really taken it on the chin. And so how do we make this so we are not interrupting the current workflow at an infusion center? Well, you do it by having the patient able to use it on their own as well as having the patients able to leave that infusion chair when their chemo is done, but they have another 2 hours of cooling minimum left to do. So we've designed a system. You can see here, our model is in the backseat of a car. It has a converter, so it can plug into the cigarette lighter. I'm based in Southern California. We have tremendous traffic here, as in many other major metropolitan areas. So patients can travel home using the device, or an infusion center if they decide to make it available to their patients. They can have their patients complete the therapy, in a lounge or waiting area or in the cafe. So they can get another patient in that infusion chair, and the patient can take a break and get up and move around. And, we really talk about from chemo to couch, like, is something that we really want to see. And we're really trying to emphasize that with these images. And as I said, AMA is cleared by the FDA. And so the FDA concurs that we're providing substantially the same treatment as the legacy systems that double all that share time. We've designed a product that has flexible fit. So we are using pliant materials to provide the cooling to the patient's scalp to really avoid that patchy bald spot problem. And, as I said, when patients are done with treatment, they can get up and leave. And that's really key. And especially as somebody who's been that patient, nobody wants to be trapped in that infusion chair for all of that extra time. I describe infusion centers as the worst airport waiting lounges, in the world.
So just to repeat, they put the cap on before they arrive for the chemo. Is that correct, Kate?
So we train them how to fit the cap. And so the cap is pre-fitted to them for when they show up to the infusion center. And so when you show up at the infusion center and, you've got your laptop or your iPad and your stuff, because you're going to be there for a couple of hours, you simply, wheel your device in, plug it in, put in the fluid, and it's less than 10 minutes to get everything set up before they start administering pre-meds. And that's normally when the nurses are running to actually go get your pre-meds and make sure that they have your correct chemo. So it's all designed to be concurrent with standard workflow.
And then obviously during the therapy, the cap is working. And then again, the time after the therapy, I think you said what, 2 hours you need?
2 hours.
2 hours. Now, I also noticed in your picture here, the patient is carrying the thing up the staircase. So how heavy is the unit? It must be pretty lightweight, huh?
It is pretty lightweight. It's currently about 20 pounds. And this is our first version. Our goal is to get it smaller. And so, but any startup, you have to start with what is known as your minimum viable product. And so this is our first version, but we really have designed it so that it's portable and easy to move. Now, Dr. Harness, you know more than anybody that many patients will have chemotherapy after surgery, and so they will not be able to lift it. And that's why we've designed it so it can roll around. And so if a patient has to get it into the car, well, a patient isn't lifting anything heavier than 5 pounds anyway, and they're being driven anyway. So it's if the patient can't manage it, we've designed it for whoever's driving them or who's aiding them. I remember after I had surgery, I had to either carry in groceries like 2 items out of grocery bags at a time, or have a friend carry them in for me, because it wasn't possible for me to carry them.
Very, very neat. All right, carry on. Very cool. No pun intended when I just said very cool, but it is cool. It is cool. All right.
So a couple of key differences that we're getting to here. The weight of the machine with the legacy systems, and this is a lot of the data that was at the foundation of our FDA clearance. But when we talk about the cooling cap material, that's a really, as well as the size of the cooling unit, that's really important, this flexible material. So it's a Sontara Veltex blend. Sontara is what surgical gowns are made out of, and it's an RF welded Velcro wrap that the patients wrap around their head, because your head, my head, anybody who's watching it, we're all going to have a different shaped head. Heads are not, we're not all Charlie Brown. I'm certainly not. And so how do you provide that nice, even fit to truly make it transportable? And we are the first device cleared by the FDA for home use. And so that's another very big advantage of our system.
Yep. Fantastic. Okay.
And this is something else that's really exciting to make viewers aware of, is that CMS support for scalp cooling is expanding. And so this has been, the financial toxicity of cancer is something that gets a lot of attention, and honestly should get more, because it is so financially burdensome to get this kind of diagnosis. But what's very exciting is, as of January 1st, CMS is reimbursing $1,850.50 for outpatient hospital setting. So place of service 22, which is really dramatically changing the aperture of who will have access to this treatment. And as you know, in our healthcare system, where Medicare goes, private payers follow. And so we're really working on, with AMA being the first broadly available device accessible for scalp cooling, we have a heavy focus on reimbursement. And we are also applying this summer, and this is getting into the technicalities of it, but I think some of your viewers might be interested in applying for what's known as a HCPCS code, which will allow us to rent this as essentially like durable medical equipment, like you would like a hospital bed or an oxygen tank or something like that, or a CPAP machine is, a really good example. But that reimbursement will be online, we hope late next year.
You beat me to it, because that was exactly the question I was about to ask you, is that, the need for this equipment is short term. And obviously,
Correct.
when you look at the expense of building the equipment, it makes sense that it could be something that's leased or rented or whatever, as a temporary home use or fantastic. Well, good for you. Okay, very cool. I keep saying very cool, not as a pun, but because I think this is really neat what you're doing, Kate.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And, when we named the company, it was definitely around, AMA and, the first therapy that we were providing, making a pun on the fact that it is cooling therapy, but also making a pun on, like cooler heads prevailing, like that moment of, oh my God, what do I do now? And being able to provide patients with information and options. And so we tried to kind of carry the pun through on multiple levels. And we really believe that information is power, and making this product broadly available is empowering for patients. So, because we've seen improved outcomes for oncology patients if they get supportive care early. And so that's fundamentally where we're at. We fundamentally believe that if patients are armed with the right information about how they can manage their side effects, they'll do better throughout treatment.
Do you envision, of these various options you've got up here, do you envision big infusion centers actually buying some of these units and then being able to rent them or just have them for patients to use? Yeah, that's what I thought.
Correct. And so, and that's why there's multiple models for acquisition. So we can rent the device directly to patients. That currently, as I said, is cash pay. We are going to work with our customers on providing them with the codes to try to get it reimbursed. That's going to be kind of an uphill battle until we get that HCPCS code that I mentioned earlier. But, the sea change for us with, our hospital customers is now that there's reimbursement, they see this as something not only that they can offer to patients that isn't going to be financially burdensome for them, but it's offering them not only a new revenue stream for them to be able to make money because the patients leave that chair when they're done with treatment so they can continue to treat a patient, but also being able to use it as a discriminating factor as they try to attract patients to come get treatment there. A physician I worked with at City of Hope, she would tell me that she, wasn't in the business of giving second opinions. She was often giving, third, fourth, fifth opinions of cancer patients as they would go around and try to decide, where do I want to get care? And so having these supportive care options are really important to patients as they make their decisions.
Well, fantastic. All righty. Very good.
Well, that fundamentally is my overview, and I really appreciate your taking the time.
Well, listen, why don't you unsave your screen so we can see each other here. There you go. Well, this is really fantastic. I think when you and I first met, I've shared this backstory with you, but I'll share it again for not only you, but our audience. I think we started the multidisciplinary breast center at the University of Michigan in 1985. In fact, it was between us and Tufts in Boston that had the very first academic multidisciplinary breast center in the country, if not one of the first in the world. And I remember knock on my door one day, a guy shows up and he is involved with Indianapolis race cars. And he said something to the effect, well, I hear that if you can cool the head, not only does it potentially make people feel better, might save hair, blah, blah, blah. I said, yeah, but what's that got to do with an Indianapolis race car? He said, well, you don't know this, but it's so hot in those cars that most of the drivers, now this is back in the 1980s, I don't know if they're still doing it or not, were actually wearing a head cap with a cooling system in it to help keep the drivers cool. Well, we weren't smart enough to follow through to see what its real impact in cancer would be. But I just thought when you think back 30 years or so ago, cooling the head was an interesting concept that at least was used in race cars, for crying out loud.
Yeah.
Kate, this is fantastic. So people are going to want to have more information. I'm assuming you've got a website that you'd like to share with everybody.
We do. It's coolerheads.com. And if they want to get in touch, they can just email hello@coolerheads.com.
Hello at Coolerheads. Okay, fantastic. Any other thoughts? I mean, it sounds to me you're getting awards. You were sharing with me that you just got a major award. You're moving forward. It just seems to me you're really in the right niche right now. Any other breaking news you want to share with people today?
It's very exciting for us. This was an idea I had, when I was going through treatment in 2016, 2017. I'm now, at the end of the summer, I'll be 5 years post-treatment, and I started this company in 2018. So it's very, no evidence of disease. So it's very exciting to kind of be hitting these personal and professional milestones at the same time. And for people who get in touch, we are rolling out at different states. There's state licensing issues, but please do get in touch, because I've been in your shoes. And that's why I founded this company, is I want patients to have choices. Well,
you're a pioneer in downsizing this and making this more available, and access to technology is really important, and affordable access to technology. You're
exactly
moving
affordable.
All the right directions. As I said, as a guy who's been in the world of breast cancer for over 35 years, congratulations to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Harness, for highlighting this story, because really this is, we know that so few patients know that there's an option. And now that, one of the things that we talk about internally is we want to evangelize scalp cooling and really, and let patients know they have a choice.
Oh, fantastic. Well, she's Kate Dilligan, founder and CEO of Cooler Heads. I'm Dr. Jay Harness from Breast Cancer Answers. As always, thank you for the privilege of your time.